We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Dalet on Meseches Megillah. This is Megillah Daf 24b. On the previous summit, there was a machlokas. Why is it that the person who reads the Haftorah is given the honor of leading the tzibur in other ways as well? One opinion was because of kavod. The Haftorah is not so much kavod in the Haftorah; it's given even to minors, so therefore we want to honor him with something else. And the other one was similar, was because of fighting. If we don't give him something else, we give it to somebody else, so then there's going to be fighting over it. So the Gemara thought maybe it's a proof from the fact that this halach applies to katanim also. By katanim, there's no fighting. So the Gemara says that's not a proof, because by the katanim, there's no kavod either, but there's kavod of the katan's father and the katan's rebbe, and that's what the Gemara says. Hachanami here also, ikan etzuye yaviv and etzuye rabo. Even though the katan himself won't fight, but there might be fighting with the father of the katan or with the rebbe of the katan. So therefore, the reasons apply by a katan as well. It's no proof from the case of katan to whether the opinion about kavod is correct or whether the opinion about fighting is correct. The Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Pocheach, Pores al Shema v'chulu. Again, a Pocheach was somebody who some of his limbs are exposed. He's not clothed properly, so he's allowed to lead the Shema, but it said certain things he's not allowed to do. It's not proper covered. For example, can't read from the Torah. So the Gemara says, Boimene Ula Barav me Abaye. Ula Barav asked Abaye the following question. Katan Pocheach Ma'u Yikra b'Torah. What about if you have a minor who isn't clothed properly? Is he allowed to read from the Torah? Rashi says, Gadol Pocheach Hudas Misham V'Lo Yerbacher Vasdavar. By a Gadol, there's an issue of arayas. Aval Katan Einu Muzar. Katan's not warned about arayas. Or maybe there's no distinction in the Mishnah between a katan and a gadol, and a katan also can't read from the Torah. So Amar Lei, so he said to him, what kind of question is that? Why don't you ask me about a katan that's naked? Aram my time alone. Why is it so obvious that a katan who's naked can't read from the Torah? Mishum kavod tzibur. That's not proper kavod tzibur. Hachanami mishum kavod tzibur. The same thing over here. If his limbs are exposed, it's no different. It's not proper kavod tzibur, whether it's a gadol, whether it's a katan. And the Gemara continues, Summa pores al shema v'chulu. It said that a summa, a blind person, is allowed to lead the tzibur in the recitation of Shema. And Rabbi Yehuda said that's not true if you're talking about a summa who's never seen anything, never benefited from the light at all, so it's not supposed to lead the Shema. So the Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in a brayso, Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, Harbeit safu lidrosh b'merkava. There are many people who seek to darshan in the Maisa Merkava. V'lo ro sam yameim. They never saw the Merkava. So the same thing should be true when it comes to leading the Shema. It's okay, fine. The blind person never saw the sun, never benefited from its light, but still should be able to lead the Shema. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda responds, Hasam bav nasa deliba talia milsa. Over there it has to do with understanding the matter. The person can concentrate and can understand it, whether they've seen it or not, by the Maisa Merkava. But over here, Mishum Hanahu, the issue is you have to benefit from it. And over here, the blind person has never benefited from the light, and therefore not able to lead the tzibur. The Gemara continues, Rabban and Islay Hana. The Rabban say it's not true. Even a blind person can benefit from the light that comes from the skies. Rabbi Yossi, like Rabbi Yossi says, the Tanya we learned in a brayso. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol Yamai Hayisim Etzdar Al Mikrazeh. All of my life, I was bothered by the following pasuk. The pasuk says, Vayisam Emashish Batzarayim. You're going to be feeling around at noontime, Kasher Yemashish Iver Ba'afela, like the blind person feels around in the dark. What's the meaning of the pasuk? What does the blind person care if it's dark or if it's light? What does it mean? Like a blind person is fumbling in the dark. The blind person is fumbling in the light. But then something happened to me and I understood the pasuk. Because one time I was walking, it was very dark. The afela was totally dark. It was the middle of the night. When I see a blind person and he's walking on the road, he has a torch in his hand. So I said to him, Beni, my son, what do you have this torch for? Amarli said to me, as long as the torch is in my hands, the people see me, and they save me, they save me from the pits and the thorns and the thistles. So in other words, the light benefits the blind person also, and that's exactly what the Rabbanan respond to Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan say to Rabbi Yehuda, even someone who's blind and been blind their entire life, they still have a certain benefit from the light. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kohen sheyesh biyad of mumin. If a Kohen has blemishes on his hands, lo yisas kapav, he shouldn't duchen, because then what's going to happen is you're not really supposed to look at the Kohen's hands during duchening, but here he's got these blemishes on the hands, it's going to attract attention, he shouldn't duchen. Rabbi Yehuda says, Afmi shahayu yadav tzevuas sitis, lo yisas kapav. Same thing would be true. Let's say the Kohen's hands are dyed with sitis, which is a certain kind of dye. He has something on his hands that's going to draw attention. He shouldn't duchen, because people are going to look at him. And the Gemara says, Tana was taught, Mumin sha'amru bepanav yadav v'raglav. When we talk about blemishes that are a problem for a Kohen for duchening, that's if it's on his face or his hands or his feet. Again, areas where the people are going to look. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Yadav bohaknios lo yisa eskapav. Let's say a person has white blotches on his skin, on his hands. Also, he shouldn't duchen for the same reason. Tanya nami hachi, we learned in a brisa like this as well. Yadav bohaknios, he has patches of white on his hands. Lo yisa eskapav, he shouldn't duchen. Akumos, akushos, let's say it's curved his hands or they're bent. Lo yisa eskapav, same thing, he shouldn't duchen. Amar Ravasi says, Chifni ubishni lo yisa eskapav. These are people from certain areas. They shouldn't duchen because, as we're going to explain in a moment, they don't pronounce things properly. Tanya nami hach, we have a brisa like this as well. In moridin lifnei ateva lo anshe beis shan, people from beis shan, that's what it means over here. Bishni, v'lo anshe beis chayfa, that's chifni, people from Haifa. V'lo anshe tivonin, also people from tivonin. All of those people shouldn't lead the prayers. And they shakorin la'alfin ayin u'la'ayin alfin, because they were not able to distinguish properly. They called an aleph an ayin and an ayin an aleph. They weren't able to distinguish properly the guttural sounds. Amar le Rabbi Chila, Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe. Rabbi Chila said to Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, Il male ata Levi. If you would be a Levi, pasal ata min aduchen, you wouldn't be allowed to sing in the Beis HaMikdash. Mishum da'avi kalach, you have a very thick voice. You don't have a good voice for leading in the Beis HaMikdash. So he was insulted. So asa Amar le lavua. So he went. Again, this is talking about Rabbi Chila said this to Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe. So Rabbi Shimon went to his father, to Rebbe, and he told his father, Amar le. So Rebbe said back to him, Zilei malei, you should go say to him as follows: Keshatam magia etzel v'chikisi la'Hashem. When you get to the pasuk of v'chikisi la'Hashem, which means you're going to await Hashem, lo nimtzas mechar from Megadif. When you say it, you can't say a ches properly, you say hey properly, so you're actually cursing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're saying v'chikisi la'Hashem. I'm going to strike Hashem. So basically, Rebbe said you can say back to him something similar that he says to you, that he doesn't pronounce everything properly, doesn't sound so good, and he's not able to read certain psukim. Amar Ravuna says zavlagon. A zavlagon is somebody whose eyes, Rashi says, are always pouring with tears. Lo yisas kapav, he shouldn't duchen. Same reason as before. So the Gemara says, meaning people are going to look at him. Gemara says, 1 second. There was a zavlagon who lived in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. He did exactly that. He was duchening. Why is it different over there? So the Gemara says, Ahu dash be'irohav. In that case, the people of the city were accustomed to him. They were used to him. So if they're used to him, they're not going to look at him. It's not an issue. Tanya Namiyachi, we have a brisa that supports this as well. Zavlagon lo yisas kapav. Again, the same case. A zavlagon shouldn't be duchenim. V'imhaya dash be'iro, but if he's familiar in his city, so mutter, so then it's mutter. And the Gemara says similarly, Amar Rav Yochanan says, Suma be'achas me'enav, if someone is blind in one of his eyes, lo yisas kapav, he shouldn't duchen. The same idea, people are going to look at him. The Gemara says the same question. V'ahu dahava b'shivavusei Rav Yochanan, dahava paras yadi, there was a person who was blind in one eye and he was duchening. So the Gemara answers the same answer. Ahu dash be'iro have, that person was a regular in his city. Tanya Namiyachi, the Gemara says we have a brisa like this as well. Suma be'achas me'en, if somebody who's blind in one of his eyes, lo yisas kapav, he shouldn't duchen. V'imhaya dash be'iro mutter. But if he's regular in his city, so then it's mutter. And then the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Misha hayu yadav tzavuos lo yisas kapav, somebody whose hands are dyed, he shouldn't duchen. Tana was taught, Imrov an she'ir malachtem bekach. If most of the people in the city, they work with dye, their hands all look like this, so then mutter, then it's going to be mutter. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ha'omer eini over lifnei ateva b'tzivonin. Let's say somebody says that I'm not going to be the chazan, I'm not going to lead the davening if I'm wearing colored garments. So afil levanim lo yavor, he shouldn't lead even if he's wearing white garments. As the Gemara will explain, this was the way of the idol worshippers, of the heretics, and therefore we're afraid that maybe this person is an oved avodah zarah. Similarly, besandal eini over, let's say the person says I'm not going to lead if I'm wearing sandals. Af yachif lo yavor, he shouldn't lead at all, even if he's barefoot. Let's say somebody has round tefillin. Number one, it's a sakana. Rashi says it's a sakana because it might enter into his head, it might injure him. V'yein ba mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah, it has to be really square. Nasna al mitzcho al pasyado. Let's say somebody puts the tefillin on his forehead, or he puts it on the palm of his hand, meaning the shel rosh on his forehead, or the shel yad on the palm of his hand. He puts it in the wrong place. Harezu derech haminus. That's the way of heretics. They place it in the wrong area. Rashi over here says, Harezu derech haminus shemevazin midrash chachamim. They disgrace the Drush of the Chachamim. They just go by what it sounds like in the pasuk. It's got to be between your eyes. It has to be on your hand, on the palm of your hand. So therefore, since they're dismissing the Medrash Chachamim, that's what we say. It's a derech haminus. Tzipon zav. Let's say a person coats it with gold. V'nosna al beis unkali shalom. He puts it on his sleeve, meaning he puts it over his garment. He doesn't put it right on his skin. Harei ze derech hachitzonim. That's the way of the outsiders. Rashi over here says, they just do their own, their own thing. They don't follow the intention of the Chachamim. It really needs to be for you a sign, not for others. It doesn't have to be on the outside of the garment. Rashi says further, tzipon zav, let's say the tefillin are coated with gold, the whole thing needs to be made from a kosher animal. If it's made out of gold, obviously that's not from a kosher animal, so that's also similarly a problem. And the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? Again, going on the first part of the Mishnah, person says, I'm not going to daven, I'm not going to be the chazan in colored clothing or wearing sandals. Why is that a problem? We're afraid again that heresy, he partakes in heresy, as Rashi over here says, Shema minus nizr kabo haminin ovdei avodah zarah, meaning the heretics who serve avodah zarah, makbidim bekach. They're the ones who are so strict about this, not to have colored garments, not to have sandals on. So therefore we're afraid, and therefore we don't let him lead the davening. Somebody who has round tefillin, it's dangerous, and it's not a mitzvah. Gemara says, let's say that our Mishnah follows the same thing as the following brisa. Tefillin merubos, it says the fact that tefillin have to be square. Halacha l'Moshe misinai, that's halacha l'Moshe misinai. V'yamar Rav, and Rav says, b'tafar nuvel achsonan, that applies on both the sides and the diagonals, meaning it has to be a perfect cube. That seems to be exactly what our Mishnah is saying. Tefillin are not allowed to be round. Exactly what it's saying over here in the Tana Rabbanan, it has to be square. So Amar Rav Papa says, not necessarily. Masnisan Davida Kiyam Guz. In our Mishnah, maybe if it would be perfectly round, it would be okay. But in our Mishnah, maybe it's round like a nut. Rashi over here explains, B'tfarnu v'lachsonim kishu tofer beis moshav, and that means when he's stitching it in where it's settled, tzarach lizor shalei kalkal ribun, he has to make sure that it's still a perfect square. B'meshichas chut hatifra, when he's pulling the string that's stitching it together. B'tzarach sheyehelen alachson kelchaso, it has to have a diagonal perfect, like a perfect cube or perfect square. B'meruba shetei etzba berochav v'orech, she etzbo shnei chumshin b'alachson. So for example, the dimensions would be, if it was 1 finger width and length, so then the diagonal over there would be 1 finger plus 2/5 in diagonal. That would be a perfect square. Kiyam guza, so the Gemara said, or Papa said, maybe our Mishnah meant it was bad if it was shaped like a nut. Agulos ke'egos, like a nut, that would be a problem. Aval agula kebeitza v'chadasha, let's say it's round like an egg or like a lentil, where it would be more perfectly round. Shapir dami, maybe in that case, our Mishnah would say it's okay. So you can't necessarily support the brisa from our Mishnah. And we should just note over here that the Rashash amends the Rashi to read as follows: Agulos ke'egos u'chebetza, that if it's round like a nut or like an egg, meaning if it's round like in the shape of a ball, that's what the Mishnah said is a problem. However, v'chadash shapir dami, maybe if it would be round like a lentil, our Mishnah would actually say that's okay. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to support the brisa from the Mishnah. In other words, it's possible that certain kinds of round shapes are being disqualified in the Mishnah, but not all kinds. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah Ha'omer, one who says, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chafei Amar Aleph.